Thank you so much, Dean Crawford. It's such a joy and an honor to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much, Sisters of Life, for coming out, and priests and religious and students at the JP2 Institute. So I'd love to begin with a prayer. And so in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, amen. Come, Holy Spirit. I pray that you will work powerfully in this institute, continue to work powerfully. Please use me as your humble instrument in these few minutes that we have together today. Bless all of the faculty and students that are here in whatever way they most need. We ask for the very special intercession of St. John Paul II, who this institute was founded on and named for. And we also pray for the repose of the soul of Pope Francis. We thank you for his pontificate, and we entrust the next pope into your hands, and the decisions and the discernment of the cardinals in this very particular moment in history of the Catholic Church. And we lift all of this up to you, Lord, in and through the intercession of Our Lady. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Okay, so as a former student, I truly am just delighted to be here with you today. I have to say, I absolutely loved my time studying at the John Paul II Institute. Like, when I look back on the years of my life, I think that they were some of my most favorite years of life, in part because the theology taught here is so beautiful in terms of our understanding of being made in the image of God, of communion, theology of the body, just an adequate anthropology. And even growing up as a devout Catholic, I'd never encountered that. And so it was a very healing time for me to be here at the Institute, and we were taken under the wings of our professors. I mean, my classes, we had, maybe it's still the same, but we would have 12, 13 people in the class. In fact, I only graduated with like 11 or 12 students. We'd frequently be over at the professors' houses and engaging with each other, all the time, and it was just a really unique and special time. This institute is a very special institute, and I'm so curious to see how things will change now with a new papacy, et cetera, in the years ahead. And I'm so excited for what is to come. So there are so many good fruits of my time, and I will be forever grateful to the John Paul II Institute. Primarily the fruits, well, there were so many, but primarily the fruits professionally that I took with me were a philosophical foundation and an understanding of what it means to be human that I just didn't have growing up, and I didn't get in my undergrad degree in psychology from a secular university. And I have used those foundations in philosophy and theological anthropology in every professional, throughout my life, personally, but especially professionally. I have used that again and again and again. And I've had a variety of jobs since I've left the Institute. I taught religion for a short period of time in high school. Mostly I've worked in public policy, but I also did a little bit of adult formation with a fellow Institute grad, Father John Ricardo, right after I was here. And I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful, and I want to encourage you, just as I begin, that this special time of being a student is a time to receive, because you'll be going forth and sharing this wonderful formation that I think really changes the world and changes the church for the better. So I'm grateful, and I'm excited for you all. Now, for my time today, for our time together today, there were so many things I wanted to say and to pack in, and so we'll have some time for questions at the end. If we have a lull, you can just ask me if I have anything in my back pocket, because I have a few little funny stories. But essentially what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the overturn of Roe v. Wade, what led to that. In part, I'm going to share my own experiences around that, in and around that, not because I'm anyone special, but I did have a very special vantage point around that time in terms of my job working at the March for Life and what that means in terms of interacting with elected officials and with other pro-life groups and with pro-life Americans. I am a firm believer that stories help to communicate, so I hope that you'll indulge me as I share some of my own stories and some stories of others. But I will also take some time to just discuss the state of affairs of our country right now, particularly as they relate to pro-life public policy, because things have shifted pretty radically in a few years. In some ways, things have shifted a lot. In other ways, they haven't shifted all that much. And so I'm just very excited. I also plan to finish hopefully just encouraging you to more fully embrace your specific vocation to help build a culture of life in this particular historic moment in time. So it's so interesting that Dean Crawford began with the fact that he didn't believe that Roe would be overturned. As I was sort of praying and preparing my remarks, I wanted to ask all of you by show of hands, who thought, maybe not like 4 years ago or even 3.5 years ago now, but 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, how many of you thought Roe would be overturned in your lifetime? By show of hands. Okay, we have one like tepid kind of maybe over there. Anyone else? No. Okay, well, me neither. I mean, even, watching the collective millions of marchers crossing the Supreme Court every year, I didn't think it was a possibility. Call me a cynic, but the thing that changed for me, and maybe this is the case for you, maybe it's the case for you, Dean Crawford, it was the legal brief that was filed in October of 2021 on behalf of the state of Mississippi, the Attorney General Lynn Fitch. And for the first time, she actually discussed the possibility of the overturn of Roe because of her specific state law. So, of course, before Roe was overturned, states around our country did not have the legal right to enact laws prior to the time of viability. In other words, states could not enact laws that were before the time that a baby could survive outside the womb. The law had changed since Roe got handed down in 1973 and with Planned Parenthood v. Casey and a few different things, but right before Roe was overturned, the legal landscape was such that states were not free to enact life protective laws prior to the time of 20, 21, 22 weeks. And so this Mississippi law did just that. And so it pushed the envelope on Roe. And the Attorney General, Lynn Fitch, was a single mom. She wasn't originally the Attorney General. She actually had to replace someone else who left. And she sort of herself had a great story for this. And, after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died and Amy Coney Barrett was put on the Supreme Court, they decided to lean in courageously. And so that brief that was filed in October of 2021 was the first time that the discussion of the overturn of Roe became a real possibility. And that month, my heart was completely changed. I heard someone give a talk about it, and I started reading through the brief itself, and I felt absolutely compelled with every group that I was speaking to at the time to ask them to begin to pray and fast that Roe would be overturned. I mean, I truly, up until that moment, I thought that there was no way, and then suddenly it seemed like, wow, this could actually happen. Maybe we're being idealists here, but it could actually happen. What seemed impossible then was made possible. So obviously so many things went into that, right? Like God's grace, religious orders like the Sisters of Life who completely put themselves 100% towards this, so many fasts, so many prayers, places like the John Paul II Institute, Supreme Court justices passing away, being named, being nominated, being confirmed, presidents, etc., politics, women praying outside abortion clinics, women regretting their abortion. So many things went into what made this possible. And of course, right around 3 years ago now, so it was like the first week in May of 2022, you may recall there was the historic leak, right? The historic leak. And when the leak came out, sort of like everything hit the fan. I mean, it got really kind of scary. Everything heated up. At the March for Life, we needed to increase security measures for our staff because there were so many threats of violence against anyone who was working in the pro-life movement. Staff began to work at home, and we did other sort of conservative, sort of simple measures. There were tactics to intimidate Supreme Court justices. Lives were threatened, right? I mean, I'm sure you've read some of this. And everybody wondered, like, was the leak real? Like, was that made up? Was it real? What was going to happen? And so then we come to about 6-7 weeks later to Friday, June 24th. And, think about where you were when you heard that Roe was overturned. Just think about that for a minute, because it was a historic moment in our country. And I'm sure you all remember exactly where you were, similar to as Dean Crawford and I were talking about the 9/11 story. So Friday, June 24th, 2022, the Supreme Court's 2021-2022 term was coming to a close. Of course, they make their decisions in right as they're coming to the end, different than they used to back when Roe was handed down. It was in January, but especially the kind of contentious decisions are made in late June, sometimes early July. And so the time period for when the Dobbs decision would be released was winding down to the final few days. At the March for Life, we had a handful of staff that had been out in California on Thursday. We've got a state march initiative now, and a bunch of them had been out there for that. I was supposed to go, but I didn't because it was getting too close to when Roe could be overturned. I started the day, I went to Mass at St. Joseph's on the Hill that morning, such a great, beautiful little church over there. Sometimes the Supreme Court justices go. I went to 8 a.m. Mass. It's right behind the Supreme Court. And then I walked over to the court. I wasn't actually expecting that the decision would come down that day, but we needed to send out this email to marchers. And so we had another staff that was going to meet me there. We were going to take a little video and send it around to all of the different marchers about, the important decision that I thought would be coming the next week. I figured the Supreme Court justices would wait until the very last day, hop in their cars, and get out of town as quickly as possible. But no, I was wrong. So I get over to the Supreme Court, and I have to say it was different. Just actually, were any of you there that day by show of hands? Okay, well then, I hope you don't mind me sharing with you. In a little bit of a scary way, fences had been erected, like really high fences. And I've been to the Supreme Court, outside the Supreme Court, a lot for these different rallies and what have you. And I'd never seen anything like that. And the tensions were really high. People were nervous. There was like a nervous buzz in the air. And someone had heard the Supreme Court decision was coming down, the Dobbs decision that day. People were looking around. They were trying to determine if the people close to them were where they were on this issue. And part of my role with representing the March for Life was to represent pro-life Americans to mainstream media. So I'd been asked by our media firm to be ready to go on CBS the day that the decision came down. And so that meant any decision day I had to be kind of near a laptop because, that's how these things were done. And so the decisions, of course, start coming down around 10. Around 9:30, I got a call to get to my desk as soon as possible because the news was that there was going to be a big decision today. So the staff that I was with, she and I drove across town. It was just she and I in the March for Life office that day to get safely into my office in front of the laptop there. And so there I am sitting, looking at my laptop. CBS has kind of piped me in, and the decision is announced around 10:12 on June 24th. Ooh, I get choked up even thinking about it. The host, who, by the way, I just watched yesterday, is over in the Vatican right now, was a huge fan of our Pope and is, covering so beautifully the coverage of his passing. And unfortunately, she wasn't as with the church when it came down to the Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade being overturned. She was horrified by having me on and by my remarks. She asked what I thought, and I was sort of, delighted and just wanted to thank the marchers, the collective millions of marchers who bore public witness to the inherent dignity of the unborn person and mothers all these years, and how I think in some part it was because of that. And she was stymied. I mean, truly, she just was so had a different reaction, as many others did on media interviews. So that day for me was surreal. A whirlwind of activity packed with media, just in our office with one other person, kind of a little bit surreal in that sense. Private calls, and despite the planning, reevaluating how to react and message, it was many hours, really even that night before it sunk in. And as the day started to wind down, June 24th, 2022, I was able to just reflect more on the providential nature, even of the date. I mean, there was so much, but there was such clarity that this was a work of God using so many human instruments, like almost like a puzzle piece coming perfectly together. This thing, that thing, the other thing, this thing, that's all at once, that could allow such a miracle that literally none of us in this room thought would ever happen in our lifetime, but ultimately did. Some of you may remember that June 24th is Every year in the church, it's the feast of St. John the Baptist. And of course, St. John the Baptist is the first martyr of marriage, right? And really, I would say a martyr for the family. And I found that so meaningful, right? It was also the feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus because it fell on the Friday, the particular Friday that year that the Sacred Heart of Jesus feast was on, which was incredible. And then in a smaller way, but I still think not insignificant, it was the birthday of the founder of the March for Life as well, Nellie Gray. And of course, the march was founded because of Roe, because Roe legalized abortion in all 50 states. The overturn of Roe did not make abortion illegal, but the march was founded because of Roe. And I thought that was beautiful and was so grateful for Nellie and happy for her that Roe was overturned on her birthday. So what a beautiful weekend, just, sort of soaking in the consoling graces of this historic moment. I don't know if you all had that amazing weekend. And then come Monday morning, it was like, bam, like such hard stuff, which is not unusual after such an amazing, beautiful consolation such as that. And so what I'd like to describe next, maybe some of you have heard of this documentary that was done. It was called The Fog of War. And I'm not making any kind of political statement about the fog of war. It was on Robert McNamara and the Vietnam War. But when I was thinking and praying about preparing for this talk, it just feels really appropriate for immediate sort of, we talk about immediate sort of and proximate events that were happening after the overturn of Roe. Immediately, there was sort of a fog of a culture war, in my humble opinion. And there was a lot that happened around that. So bear with me and I'll share with you just a few thoughts. So there was a lot of confusion. I mean, people were confused and it was confusion. I mean, there was confusion on both sides. So on the side of Americans or anyone who identified as being pro-choice, there was so much anger and fear. I mean, maybe some of you, like me, even experienced this with your friends and your family. So much anger and fear. There were angry, violent demonstrations. My staff and I had to get out of the office because places were beginning to be looted that night that Roe got overturned, and there were riots in the city, demonstrations over at the Supreme Court. There was a group called Jane's Revenge that was threatening all sorts of terrible things to anyone who was pro-life. There was just tremendous confusion about what it actually did, like what the Dobbs decision did. So many sort of pro-choicers either thought or acted as if suddenly abortion in the United States was now illegal. I mean, it would have been amazing if abortion was illegal, but that just wasn't the reality of what the Dobbs decision did. There was a lot of media fear-mongering, particularly on the topic of miscarriage care. I mean, you might remember, but women were told if they had a miscarriage that doctors wouldn't see them and that they could die basically as a result of that. And this was touted again and again and again. So there were these reports that doctors would actually refuse to treat women with ectopic pregnancies because they were afraid that they would get arrested for defying pro-life restrictions. So in reality, every pro-life protection that was enacted after Dobbs came down allowed for miscarriage care. Like there was nothing in there about miscarriage care. So this was completely erroneous. There was no truth to this, but it was like this huge story that went on for months and months and months. And there was like public policy that was introduced about it even. I mean, so it was terrible. There was a massive surge on vandalism of pregnancy care centers, the frontline workers trying to help women facing the unexpected pregnancy. And then politically and policy-wise, there were attempts federally and in the states to not only just codify what would be called at that point as Roe sort of ish or Roe-esque restrictions or rights into state laws or federal law, but they went way further in terms of expanding abortion rights. Thankfully, at the federal level, for the most part, none of these passed. So that's very good news. But at the state level, we've had a lot of a much different time, and I want to drill down on that. I think that our biggest sort of the longest ranging heartache and sort of negative reactions to the overturn of Roe has happened at the states. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time there explaining what has happened. But first, so I mentioned sort of the confusion, just tipping the tip of the iceberg there, the confusion on the side of pro-choice Americans. In fairness, there was a lot of confusion on the side of pro-life Americans as well. A lot of confusion. I can remember 6 months after the decision came down, I was shopping in Home Depot, maybe some of you do that as well, and a fellow who I'd known from years ago, just a guy, he hadn't been a student at the JP2 Institute, but I'd known him just in Catholic circles. I ran into him and he came up, he knew of my job, and he congratulated me and talked about how amazing it is that abortion is illegal now in our country. This was, a very devout Catholic 6 months after the decision came down. And maybe that was like, an outlier, but well, not really. As the election got close, my priest actually preached from the pulpit that since abortion was now illegal in our country, and I'm like, oh gosh. So he just made a mistake. He didn't really think that, because I did reach out right after that, like, ooh, we're it's not good to be passing along like erroneous information. But I'm sure that many of you heard a quote. It was used over and over again around the time of the overturn, a Winston Churchill quote, but it was so perfect for the moment. It was, he said this after the Battle of El Alamein during World War II, where he was asked, is this going to be the end of the war, end of World War II? And his response was incredible. It's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps it's the end of the beginning. It's not the end, it's not even the beginning of the end, but perhaps it's the end of the beginning. So maybe you have to think through that a little bit. Like, what did he mean? Well, what he meant was we're moving on to stage 2, but we're not even close to done, but we're in a different phase. And that's really what happened with the overturn of Roe and the Dobbs decision. We were moving into a new phase, a phase where helping women facing unexpected pregnancies in a tangible way was all the more important. And the states had more freedom. States had new freedom. Now, I'm a little nervous saying this here, but I'm gonna. So I'm blessed, along with Sister Virginia Joynout, to have a role in the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. They have these different committees, of course, and we're blessed to be able to listen in and advise even on some of the pro-life issues, and it's wonderful. Even the bishops were confused, and not specifically the bishops on that committee, but the lion's share of my time from August of 2022 until January of 2023 was spent trying to convince bishops that we still needed to march. Many bishops sent letters to their faithful saying, you don't have to go to the national march any longer. We don't need to march. We've overturned Roe. There's not a need to march anymore. And that's so wrong-minded. So it is true again that the March for Life began because of Roe being handed down and abortion being made legal in all 50 states. But sadly, again, the Dobbs decision didn't make it illegal, but even more importantly, it didn't make abortion unthinkable in our country. And the March for Life is such like a movement, a cultural movement of young people, and a positive thing. And to signal that we're done building a culture of life was really the wrong thing at that moment, because, I mean, we're not even sure yet. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, if the number of abortions have gone down. If they have, they've only gone down just a little bit since Roe was overturned. So our actual work is far from done. It's just different. So there was this immediate sort of communication, confusion over what did the decision do, on both sides, on the pro-life side and the pro-choice side. So kind of that fog of culture war, so to speak. But then, over the next few years, as people began to understand more of what actually did happen with the decision, we moved into what I would also describe different, but kind of similar to the fog of culture war, like a tidal wave or a cultural reverberation, earthquake reverberation of the overturn of Roe, which then is kind of a pendulum swinging one way. And this is going to happen anytime the Supreme Court makes a major decision on human rights. The pendulum's going to swing the opposite way for a little bit of time, and we're going to see that lived out. We're going to see that lived out in politics, in elections, in public policy, and we're going to see it in public opinion. And then we're going to see the pendulum shift back. And that's where we are right now. We're starting to see the pendulum shift back a little bit, but we've been living, I think, in these last 3.5 years in this kind of sort of this earthquake reverberation aftershocks of the overturn of Roe. So as I mentioned, I think that one of our hardest, one of the most difficult things that's happened as a consequence of Roe being overturned is the states. So many of you have heard of these state ballot initiatives, I think these constitutional amendments. And of all of the consequences, I think that this is the hardest and most long-reaching consequence since the overturn. It's going to be really hard to undo them. So let me talk a little bit about what these are exactly. So all told, 16 states have weighed in on constitutional amendments. What are constitutional amendments? I thought I had more notes here on that. So essentially, a constitutional amendment is this. A state can vote. So with the overturn of Roe, states had more power to enact pro-life protections. They also had the opposite power to enact more pro-abortion protections as well. So states can vote to have an amendment added in the general election in November, and they can add to their constitution basically either an abortion right, or it could even be a pro-life amendment as well. So basically the left very cleverly took the opportunity to do everything possible to fund as many of these ballot initiatives as possible. George Soros put something like 120 million into these ballot initiatives. That's low. I think I've got that number wrong, but there's been so much money put into these. So essentially, they're very, very hard to message on because they take policy making outside of the parameters of normal policy making. So typically, a pro-life bill would be introduced in a state house. It would be argued. It would be analyzed. You'd have a lot of language. You'd have 5-6 pages of language of what this bill does and doesn't do. It would be debated on the House floor. And that's not the case with these ballot initiatives. Instead, there's language. It's usually a special interest group that presents the language. There's a lot of money put into different campaigns, PR campaigns that happen around there. A certain number of signatures need to be obtained in order for this to be voted on. And then it's really an up or down vote. It either passes or it doesn't pass. And in some states, there's usually a 50% threshold of people that need to vote to make it pass. Or in the case of like Florida, there's a 60% threshold. These are much weightier because once a law is included in a state constitution, it's very hard to undo it. So it's not like a bill has been passed that could be changed in 2 or 3 years. I mean, it would take a lot to undo these. And they go a lot further than what even Roe allowed for. So the left very cleverly took advantage of the opportunity, and we've had many ballot initiatives. So all told, 16 states at this stage have weighed in. We've had 13 losses. That is Arizona, Colorado, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nevada, New York, California, Michigan, Ohio, and Vermont. There were 2 pro-life constitutional amendments that were voted on that lost. One was in Kansas, and it was a really hard-fought loss. It was just a few months after Roe was overturned. After the Dobbs decision came down, it was in August. And then another one that was lost was in Kentucky. I have to tell you that these have been very defeating on the pro-life community, and we really they're so expensive. The left puts so much money in on this. And so just when I was working at the March for Life, we would put a lot into these fights. So just in the sense of doing everything you can to get people out to vote. We had state marches in most of these states that had ballot battles, and it was tough. I mean, it was really tough, and we had so many defeats. Thanks be to God, we had our first victories this November, and that's why I say that I think that the pendulum is now finally swinging back. So we thought maybe we'd have one victory in November. We had 3. which was incredible. So Nebraska enacted a pro-life protection, but also beat the negative ballot initiative. South Dakota, a very good pro-life state, also beat the ballot initiative. And then Florida beat it. Florida had a 60% threshold, so it was like harder to beat. In other words, 60% needed to proactively vote that they wanted this pro-abortion measure. And but it's still a massive victory. I mean, really, there are many other pro-life states, as you heard me list before, that have lost these battles. So two of the hardest fought and most expensive battles were in Michigan in November of 2022 and in Ohio of November of 2023. And so to just make it a little bit more concrete, I was blessed to just be in Ohio a few weeks ago for a pregnancy center banquet. And what does it look like when a state does pass one of these? Like, how do things change? Because Ohio was pretty pro-life. And it was really shocking, and so much money was put into that and such work. But now Ohio has become an abortion destination, mainly from Kentucky, but also Indiana and West Virginia, which have near total pro-life laws. Ohio has 6 surgical abortion clinics. In 2024, so the first year in which the ballot, the new constitutional amendment was enacted, abortions increased by 13% in their state, with roughly 14%. So like almost all of them were coming from out of state. So it's really become like an abortion tourism state. So that's tough, right? It's tough to hear all of that. But there's a lot of good news too. There's a lot of good news. So the flip side is that, as we've mentioned a few times, that states can enact pro-life laws prior to the time of viability. And many states have done that, which is phenomenal. So today, while some are held up in the courts, we can celebrate that 24, so nearly half of the states in our country have enacted laws protecting life at 15 weeks or sooner. And most of them are sooner than 15 weeks. There's like one with 15 weeks, a couple that are 12 weeks, a couple that are heartbeat, but most of them are like from the moment of conception. So it's amazing. So these states include Alabama, Florida, Arkansas, Georgia, Indiana, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Wyoming, West Virginia, South Carolina, Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Mississippi, Missouri, Nevada, South Dakota, Tennessee. So we've got a lot of wonderful celebrations here. And so, between some of these ballot initiatives and then the positive laws that are being enacted, though, what probably is happening in terms of the actual number of abortion is that it's going up in some states and it's going down in other states. And so the jury's still out. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But that's a little bit of where the states are at. And I think right now that's the most important thing. Federally, some very egregious bills have been introduced, but thankfully none by and large have been enacted. And really, we should thank God for that, because in the few months following the overturn of Roe with the Dobbs decision, the Women's Health Protection Act, which would have gone much further than what Roe allowed, could have been enacted, but it wasn't, thankfully. And I will say that there's just within kind of pro-life leaders, there's a lot of conversation about the best strategy. What's the best pro-life bill? What's the best pro-life law? And there's not agreement, which often happens. I mean, in my humble opinion, there can be a lot of divisiveness within the community in terms of coming to consensus on what to advocate for on the Hill. And that's okay. Like, good things can be born out of those kinds of conversations. But there is a fallacy, even in conversations today, I heard a little bit of this, that while Dobbs did give more power to the states to enact these laws prior to the time of viability, what it didn't do is what we hear all the time. It didn't return abortion or return pro-life laws to the state. It didn't. It did give states a lot more power, but there's still an absolute need to be working at the federal level. So let me give you like one really specific example. The Hyde Amendment. I'm sure can someone, who knows what the Hyde Amendment is here? Great. Yes, Dr. Atkinson. What is it? Putting you on the spot. That's right. So in other words, overseas or here in the United States. So the Hyde Amendment protects taxpayer funding for the most part, not 100%, for the most part, for paying for most abortions. It's not been codified into law. It's been included every single year in appropriations since the late 1970s. Arguably, the Hyde Amendment has saved more lives than any pro-life policy on the Hill. It saved at least over 2 million lives, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago, so we know that it saved more. But we fight tooth and nail every single day on the Hill just to keep that. So if the battle, working for federal legislation and pro-life protection stopped on the Hill, we would lose that overnight. We would suddenly be paying, all of us would be paying with our taxpayer dollars for abortion. So abortion is not returned to the states. The federal role, it's different, but it's still very important. Now, I want to mention very briefly politics here. And of course, this is not a political conversation. This is not in any way kind of like a campaign event. And I myself I'm not a Republican. I'm an independent. Okay, I'm an independent. And the March for Life, it has never endorsed a candidate. But it's important to mention politics because it has played into this all. So abortion wasn't a partisan issue until Ronald Reagan. In fact, many Democrats were very pro-life. Of course, sort of the party of social justice, so to speak. It's changed a little bit, but a time when things shifted quite a bit was in 2010 when the Affordable Care Act passed, and there was this massive division. Until then, it was kind of okay for Democrats to be pro-life, but when Obamacare passed, things changed, and it became very hard for a Democrat to be pro-life. I know at the March for Life, we try still every year to have a pro-life Democrat speak, but mostly we have to have someone come from the states. And there are many, many pro-life Democrats in the states. So if someone feels a call out there, something to do is to work on the Democrats to become more pro-life, in my humble opinion, or a third party, I don't know. But after the overturn of Roe, of course, we saw pro-life elected officials immediately very excited, all sorts of celebrations about this and taking credit for it and what have you, but then ultimately really distancing themselves from the issue. Even some of our most ardent, tried and true politicians distanced themselves from the issue. And I would just say that was another consequence of the kind of earthquake reverberation of the overturn of Roe. Even, of course, we saw that in our own presidential election most recently. So conversely, we've seen on the other side that the Democratic side used to claim, like in the Clinton era, safe, legal, rare. They were working for what was safe, legal, and rare. Now, sadly, it's so extreme. It's abortion on demand until birth, paid for by your tax dollars, which is so sad. And there were 2 recent examples at the conventions. Planned Parenthood this past August offered free abortions. They actually had a mobile abortion clinic. And you probably know that Planned Parenthood gets 43% of its revenue from the federal government. Planned Parenthood, of course, is our nation's largest abortion provider. And then the Democrats spent $160 million on abortion ads in this presidential campaign. And so, again, while I'm not sort of one or the other, we didn't have a perfect candidate. We haven't for a long time. But I would say that the Democratic candidate, the only thing that she really felt comfortable speaking about in this campaign was this issue. It was the only thing that she felt that she had total command over the issue, and she sort of ran on this, and they put more money into this than anything. And so the biggest takeaway for me, besides the ballot initiatives, that was my biggest rah-rah after that night, but the other biggest thing was abortion didn't win. And for me, the pendulum was swinging back because we've watched it kind of go this way, and now it's coming back. It's not totally back, but it's coming back. We did lose a lot of ground with the Republicans. The party platform has been getting stronger and stronger in the way of life every single year, with the strongest being 2016. But this platform, actually, I would say 2020, the strongest was 2020. This platform was weakened, and IVF was introduced. We know IVF, from a beautiful Catholic standpoint, where the church stands on that. And even just from a purely life standpoint, there's a massive loss of life in the process of IVF, massive loss of life. And so, anyway, something to consider about how these Supreme Court decisions impact so many different things that impact other things. Because the truth of the matter is, with laws, we need elected officials to pass good laws. And that's just the game. That's the reality. Another part of this, so changing laws is great. Elections is important to change laws, but also at its heart, we're trying to change hearts and minds, right? We're trying to change public opinion, and that's a lot harder than changing laws. But at the March for Life and in my own work, we've tried to emphasize very much, yes, we work to make abortion illegal, but more to make abortion unthinkable. We're working to make abortion unthinkable. And so how do you measure that? How do you measure culture change? And you can look at a few different things. You can look at the actual number of abortions. You can look at the number of abortion clinics, especially as compared to pregnancy care centers, and you can look at public opinion. And so with abortion data, there are essentially two different places that we get our best data. And for any economists out there or statisticians, this is an area where we need so much work because both of them are very biased. One is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and the other is the Guttmacher Institute. The CDC doesn't require states to give this information to them, so many states don't. For example, California doesn't, Maryland doesn't, New York doesn't, so the states with the highest abortion numbers don't give anything to CDC, and there's no consistency between the states that do report. And then, of course, the Guttmacher Institute was originally the research arm of Planned Parenthood. And so they have a terrible bias towards abortion here. And so, but they're able to get more accurate numbers because of their relationships within the industry. And so, so just a week ago, their latest report came out. And so what we know sort of by and large is, so here Roe comes down in 1973, and essentially the number of abortions went up and up and up and up and up until the late 1980s, early 1990s. And the height, sadly, was 1.6 million abortions. And then it started decreasing annually, by the way, annually. Then it started decreasing every single year until about 2017, where there were about 900,000 abortions, and then it's been kind of going up and down since 2017. So we have Roe v. Wade, it goes up and up and up and up, and then it goes down, 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 and then kind of sort of stabilizing a little bit. So we work to obviously bring that down more, but the fact that we've had these massive downticks, and by the way, public opinion has gone alongside the actual number of abortions. So someone who self-identifies as being pro-choice or pro-life, for example, so 1973, people increasingly self-identified as being pro-choice, 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 pro-choice until the late 1980s, early 1990s, where that started going down and more people became pro-life, 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 pro-life. Why? A lot of things. The work that all of you all are doing. I think advances in science and technology. You can't say that a baby is a lifeless blob of tissue when we have ultrasonography that shows that is just not the case, and we can hear a heartbeat so early on. Women regret having been involved in abortion. They're not happy with their experience. And I should always say, even in an audience like this, that there's always hope and healing if anyone's been involved in abortion. And so you have some of the best priests and sisters here that you could speak with about that. But it's important anytime that any of you are speaking about abortion, it's so important to mention that because we move and live in the walking wounded. I mean, I'm sorry to say that 1 in 4 women in our culture have had an abortion, and they carry those war wounds. There is no question about it. And we should all be very aware of that, not to tiptoe around it, but to know that the need for mercy and healing is real. It's real. So another important public opinion poll is the annual Knights of Columbus Marist poll. This comes out every January. By the way, Marist is academically rigorous. It's used by News Corps, CBS, McClatchy, so it's not, even though it has a beautiful Catholic name, it sounds Marian, it's not a Catholic organization, or at least they don't sort of operate in that way. But the Knights of Columbus measure year over year really important data points around being pro-life. Perhaps the most important, or one of the most important, is just that Americans, by and large, for well over 13 years, would limit abortion at most to the first 3 months of pregnancy. Like, most abortions do happen in the first trimester, and so we know that any abortion is one too many, and we're working against those early abortions. But even that data is different than where the United States stands legally on this. And so if we can use that to impact laws in a positive direction, it's great. Okay, I'm going on and on here. Another way of measuring culture change is just looking at the sheer number of abortion clinics versus pregnancy care centers. So In the middle 1980s, there were nearly 2,000 abortion clinics. Today, I just looked this morning, there are, on Guttmacher's website, there are 764. So the number has decreased radically. People don't want to do abortions. Doctors do not want to do abortions. Conversely, in the middle 1980s, there were approximately 500 pregnancy care centers. These were called crisis pregnancy centers. We like to call them pregnancy help centers. Today, there are over 3,000, and that includes some maternity homes as well. And these are really state-of-the-art facilities that are offering medical supports to women and counseling and all sorts of wonderful things. So that's a little bit of information on kind of where our culture is. And I want to say this, that for perspective, it takes time to change culture. It takes time, so we can look at past Supreme Court decisions that have been around human rights issues. For example, Plessy v. Ferguson, which upheld racial segregation as constitutional. That was handed down in 1896. It wasn't until 1954 when the Supreme Court handed down Brown v. Board of Education, which overturned racial segregation as unconstitutional. When Loving v. Virginia was handed down by the Supreme Court, that was 1967. Anyone remember what Loving v. Virginia is? No, really? Yes, Nick, right? Yeah. What is it? Can you tell?
It overturned a Virginia law that precluded interracial marriage.
Yes, so Loving v. Virginia made interracial marriage constitutional in the United States. 1967, that the Supreme Court handed that down. Public opinion polls from 1967 show that a whopping 4% of Americans agreed with that decision when it came down. 4% of Americans agreed with that decision. I share that with you because we are in this for the long game, especially when it comes to changing hearts and minds. One last data point as I'm beginning to conclude here, the end of the beginning, my own piece of Winston Churchill here. I think this one's really important. It's not so much measuring culture change, but this is maybe a call to some of us here today, which is that it's really sad, actually. 60% of women who have had an abortion report that they wouldn't have had an abortion if they had the necessary emotional or financial support that they needed. So let me just say that again. 60% of women who chose abortion say that they wouldn't have if they had the necessary emotional and financial support. The majority of women who chose abortion didn't want to. They were looking for support. So what does a woman need when she's facing an unexpected pregnancy? She most needs to hear, you can do this and I will help you. And then she needs to know how you'll help her. And you can direct her to the wonderful plethora of organizations out there or help to start one yourself. One of my wonderful professors from here, from the John Paul II Institute, was Dr. Atkinson here with us today. I have here a brilliant Anglican priest turned Catholic professor. We have many brilliant professors with us here today. But he said something in one of his classes that it burns on my heart. And I use this in so many different talks. And it's that the Holy Spirit gives to the church what she needs in a particular time period. And it's so true. Do you remember saying that, Dr. Atkinson? The Holy Spirit gives to the church what she needs for a particular time period. So we can consider, the church raises up saints that show virtue in a way that responds to the poverty of the culture in the moment. It's so beautiful that God in his infinite wisdom allows us in our freedom, and that is the case, right? We can look at historically like St. Francis and St. Clare, the poverty, the return to rebuild the church, or St. Maximilian Kolbe, right? The saint of sacrifice of human dignity amidst the crimes against humanity in World War II, or our own namesake, St. John Paul II, who also, he smelled the bodies burning from Auschwitz, right? He lost his mom at such a young age. He was formed in the crucible of understanding human dignity in a way that we can't really even begin to understand. And then he, wrote more about marriage and family and human dignity than any church, any pope ever in the history of the church. And so I say that because here we have this period, where we are the positives, the negatives. We've had this beautiful overturn of Roe, but we have a lot kind of going against us in terms of our understanding of what it means to be human, gender, all of these things. And so, who is God raising up, in this unsettling time? And you might see where I'm going with this, but that is you. That is you. He is raising up you, especially you who have been gifted John Paul II Institute formation, especially you. But all of us, it can be a temptation to want to bury our heads. I certainly have it. But more than ever, we need you to be the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So one of my favorite quotes, and I truly am coming to a close here, it's from Christi Fidelis Laici, which was St. John Paul II, 1988. And it talks about the problems of the world and how we're called, especially as laity, to respond to the actual problems in the world. So if you'll bear with me, it is necessary then to keep a watchful eye on this, our world, with its problems and values, its unrests and hopes, its defeats and triumphs, a world whose economic, social, political, and cultural affairs pose problems and grave difficulties. This, then, is the vineyard. This is the field in which the faithful are called to fulfill their mission. Jesus wants them, as he wants all of his disciples, to be salt of the earth and light of the world. This is your vineyard. This world with its perplexities is your vineyard. JP2 students, this world with its defeats and triumphs in April of 2025. I think we can all list them off our mind. You just have to watch TV tonight to see it. This is your vineyard. But you who've been given the special gift of this formation, this world desperately needs you to be salt and light. And so, in the words of Pope John Paul II, have courage, be not afraid. Thank you very much.